hello again, KCIW listeners, and welcome to Curry Café. I'm volunteer Rick McNamer with your host, Ray Gary, KCIW's own famous radio personality. Every Sunday afternoon, we put together a panel of guests, or a guest in our case today, to discuss topics of interest in our community. Listeners can participate in our show by texting in questions or comments, and man, do we love texting in questions or comments. So please do, 541-661-4098. Again, 541-661-4098. Now, before we begin, I would like to let our listeners know that KCIW is an all-volunteer community radio station that depends on our volunteers, sponsors, underwriters, and local businesses with their generous donations to keep us on the air. If you'd like to help us out, please go to kciw.org, where you can listen live, listen to past shows and podcasts, and you can also click on Get Involved to find out how to become a member of KCIW. Sponsor a show, volunteer, and even how to produce your own show if you'd like. Okay, now here's Ray to tell us about today's show.
Before I tell us about today's show, I just wanted to do a little shout-out. Last night I went with Sharon to the Pistol River, I think they call it a concert hall or whatever, and they had a wonderful group there called Apple Burner, I'm sorry, which included 4 people playing various instruments. It's a little hard to find this place. You kind of have to know where it is. There's no signs or anything. You drive down a road and you go to another road, and kind of felt like it was in some kind of a secret place, but it's not.
Those are sometimes the best places.
Yes. So one of the people that was at that show last night was a fellow named Cliff Stanzo. I'm sorry.
And I know him, yeah.
Yeah, we expect to have him on the show next week. He's a wonderful entertainer and a songwriter, and I want to talk to him a lot about how you write songs. But anyway, done with that. Okay. Now we need to go on to our guest, who will allow to introduce himself and tell us why he thinks he should be here today.
We all want him here today.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm Robert Silky O'Sullivan, and I have a fairly interesting life story, and I have a birthday coming up, and the station people found out that was happening, and they said, why don't you come and talk about your life in Curry Café? And my life is somewhat different from a lot of people's, partially because of a rather unusual beginning in life, and partially because I had multiple careers which changed dramatically during my 40s. My father was born in 1876, which sounds a long time ago, and indeed
I agree, that's a long time ago.
Is. And he had a interesting life. He was a typesetter on these big old machines known as linotype, which were run with steam and coal and heat, and it was very noisy, not very good environment. But he was the world's fastest typesetter on these machines, and among other things, the company that made the machines actually hired him as an exhibitionist to things such as the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, where he and Scott Joplin undoubtedly had the fastest fingers at the whole place. Anyway, that marriage didn't go real well, and he later hooked up with a woman of Danish ancestry who lived in Brooklyn, was a Lutheran by faith, and among other things, the two of them had 2 children, an older brother, no longer with us, but who became a physicist, and the younger brother, me, who wound up doing lots and lots of different type things. And anyway, and in that process of their coming to California and wanting to live out the American dream, I don't quite understand how it all happened, but we kept moving around. And I went to like 7 or 8 different grade schools by the time it was the 3rd or 4th grade. And anyone who sees my handwriting can see that I didn't get good handwriting training or a lot of other things. But it settled down some by the time I got to the 4th and 5th grade, wound up going to schools in the same school district in San Mateo, California. And but then my brother got accepted to UC Berkeley, and the family's way of dealing with that was for the whole family to move to Berkeley, and which is not a good thing for someone who's 14 years old. But in the scheme of things, it was a wonderful thing for me because San Mateo was kind of a dull, middle-class suburb of San Francisco, while Berkeley was an amazingly important intellectual center in lots of different ways.
I'm sorry, what year was this?
It was going back to 1955 or so.
Okay. Had Berkeley already developed the reputation that they did later?
Not quite yet. In fact, the demonstrations I first was aware of when I got there was they were having panty raids, and panty raids are not quite the same issues as came up in Berkeley when
love, not war.
Well, okay, that's part of it. Berkeley actually became famous as a free speech center in like the summer of '63 or so, when the school tried to stop their raising funds to support the Mississippi Summer in Mississippi, where they were trying to make sure that the schools there were integrated and that justice was held by all. And and Berkeley was also interesting in the way of having wonderful bookstores and other institutions that I could relate to, and that had a lot to do with the shaping of who I became, and which might be valuable if I talk about who I came on issues of civil rights and human rights, because I was involved in those things pretty early in my life.
At the beginning of those movements, correct?
Well,
pretty much?
Pretty much. Well, the modern civil rights movement kind of started with the Supreme Court decision on integration of schools.
Brown versus
Board of Education?
Yeah.
And that was 1955, and the Montgomery bus boycott was not long after that, and there were lots of things going on in civil rights, and I was a high school kid who was interested and had learned enough about history and learned enough about the law to realize how grossly unfair this country was to black people and other minorities, and that if you had things going on in your head which identified with the need of those people to have justice, you get involved. And in my case, as a high school student, I guess in one way, my first involvement was going to a rally in Oakland, California, where Martin Luther King Jr. was speaking. And it was a rally almost overwhelmingly of the African American church. The early days of the civil rights movement, an organization evolved called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but it was largely a church-related movement that was trying to make sure that the rights that should be guaranteed to everyone was guaranteed to our black members and other minorities.
Immigrants, women, for gosh sakes. I mean, it covered
there's a current myth around that the United States of America was the first democratic country and democracy evolved out of here. Well, that's hardly true at all in some very basic ways. The people who signed the Declaration of Independence, and the people who were involved in the development of the Constitution were in many cases, or virtually all cases, white male property owners. And there were two types of property that were considered valuable for that role, and one was that had to do with physical property, real estate, and the other had to do with slaves.
Yes.
And all of these people who we say are our founding fathers were, or not all of them, but many of them, including Thomas Jefferson.
Well, when Thomas Jefferson penned the words, all men are created equal, we hold this to be self-evident, I think he was probably handed that pen by a slave.
Could well have been.
Yeah.
And he fathered children by slaves. He didn't free them after. At one point, he had at least 60, I think. And anyway,
One more interruption. If you go to Monticello and go on the tour, they do not tread lightly on his slave ownership. They take you out, show you the slave cabins and things like. And he had not tunnels, but passageways under the house where the slaves were traveling around so that they wouldn't get involved with guests or people.
Yeah. Well, and beyond the point of the founding fathers, the entire world economy revolved in a lot of ways around things that related to slaves. Sugar, rum, and things involved in that became incredibly valuable and funded really much of the northern parts of North America, as well as England and other slave-owning countries that profited from all these. And the way in which the world developed into a place where commerce and trade became very important was at the result of stealing people from the continent of Africa, using their labor in many, many different ways, and making this not a precursor of democracy, but really an enabler of a terrible consumerist type society that developed ever since then. And anyway, I took these things seriously when I was in high school and started identifying with the civil rights movement. It wasn't usual for a white kind of middle class, sort of working class person to be into such things, but I was. And it became an important part of my life. And I should mention that the woman that my father hooked up with came from a Lutheran Danish background, and she always had the idea that she wanted me to be a minister. And whenever we went to a different town, she always tracked down the local Lutheran church. And in that local Lutheran church, I learned some basic things about Christianity, which I would hope all Christians understood, but many don't. And at the heart of Christianity is a belief that, first of all, we are all made in the image of God, and it specifically mentions male and female. This is in the book of Genesis. And that we should live in ways that are not for ourselves, but ultimately for other human beings in all of their life and in their afterlife. And anyway, I took all that seriously. And if you take all that seriously, you don't exclude women, you don't exclude slaves, you don't exclude people who are different in other ways. And I just connected with that fairly early on in my life, and found myself involving myself in some civil rights demonstrations, and some of that was unusual because in some cases like I made a commitment to get arrested during the Republican National Convention in San Francisco in 1964, the famous Barry Goldwater convention, and there were like 1,000 people at the Cow Palace south of San Francisco, where there were over 1,000 people who chose to sit in after the session and keep the people from going home and all that. And anyway, we did sit in, but the Republicans figured out another exit for the people to get out of, and while we were sitting in, all willing to get arrested and all that, they snuck out the back door, and that kind of thing happened a number of times. And another occasion, it was at a auto dealership where we were trying to get them to hire blacks from roles other than simply janitorial.
Mm-hmm.
And there too, they didn't arrest us. They just let us stay there all night. And but anyway, in my early life, I went to schools that were part of kind of pre-seminary schools, training for the Lutheran ministry. And while there, I became involved in trying to make the other people know a little more about our history and our past, and wound up in an unusual place, especially compared with Berkeley, Fort Wayne, Indiana. And while there...
That's about the total opposite of Berkeley, wouldn't it be?
One time, and this was a few years back, but USA Today had a poll of what were the worst metropolitan areas in the country in terms of culture and lots of other stuff, and they rated Fort Wayne as the worst.
Oh, my.
And
now, this is recently you're talking.
That poll was taken like within the last 3 years or so.
Okay.
But it probably hasn't changed from...
I grew up on Long Island. I bet you that's a real close runner-up.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yes. But anyway, while at Fort Wayne, stuff was going on in the South. And you probably are aware of a man named James Meredith was trying to get admitted to the University of Mississippi. He had all the qualifications except his skin color. And as the joke goes around, what has 4 eyes and no sight? And that's Mississippi.
Okay. Not the most, quote, progressive state in the nation.
For sure. Anyway, the governor of Mississippi, one Ross Barnett, made some forays to the north to get support for their movement, including to good old Fort Wayne. And here I was in a school where there were like 400 people who wanted to study for the Lutheran ministry, and should have understood that when you are committed to Christianity, you're committed especially to being real sensitive to the needs of the poor and the homeless and the hungry. And so when he showed up in town, we organized a group of students from that school. We were also in contact with some Catholic seminarians who lived nearby, and we put on a demonstration in Fort Wayne, peaceful one, to protest his presence and what he'd been involved in. And I was the spokesperson for that campaign. And that evening, we went to a local bar. Many Lutherans are beer drinkers. It's part of their German and Northern European heritage.
Hail, hail.
And anyway, we'd often gone there and just thought after a long and good and prosperous day that let's go get a beer. Well, while we were there, the news came on, and there on the news was me being interviewed about what we had just done, and all of a sudden it got very, very quiet in that bar.
Was that so everybody could buy you a beer?
I don't think so, and they weren't suggesting that we sing Kumbaya. But what they were saying is, or what they first started doing was kind of signaling to the bartender. And not sure what the signaling was about, but we realized that it maybe wasn't real friendly. He was looking for something underneath the cash register. We were afraid it might be a gun. We didn't know, but they were making those kind of signals, and pretty soon the bartender came out with an 8x10 glossy photograph of a lynching. And they started...
How very Christian.
They started passing it around in the bar there and saying things like, "No more problems there. These students should learn a lesson," and that sort of thing. And wasn't quite sure what they meant about the "no more problems there," and I didn't really learn about that until like 25 years later. But it turned out it was a local lynching, not in the Deep South where many of the lynchings took place, but in the North.
Unfortunately, it was also in the North too. And
yeah, it was
many areas
of the North.
Sad.
And nowadays, that particular photograph that they were passing around is kind of the go-to photograph about the ugliness of lynchings, because among other things, it has a lot of white people underneath the lynching looking like they're drunk and celebrating. And
which I'm sure was the case, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it was. And anyway, that they had this glossy photograph. They passed it to me, and I was asked, "What do you think of that?" And I said, "That was the most obscene thing I've ever seen."
Mm-hmm.
And there was long, long silence in the saloon.
Obviously not in a friendly place there.
Not a friendly place there.
Scary.
Scary. And when we fully comprehended what was going on, we just got out of there as quickly as we could. And anyway, you don't expect that kind of thing happening in the North, but it did. And it helped. It helped shape what was important to me, and it was clearly a threat of sorts. And there was a possibility.
It sounds like a big threat.
Yeah, of lynching a young white pre-ministerial student might be a good way to create a St. Robert's, even if he were Protestant, as Jonathan Daniels became celebrated in the Episcopal tradition. And anyway, after that incident and some other incidents, I found myself recognizing that if you really believe your faith, you try to make sure that those who are being persecuted in one way or another, or not fed, or not given services, that you commit your life and you commit the way you live to trying to make some difference in that whole score. Now, I made mention to the "no more problems there" being said when that photograph was being passed around, and I didn't know what to make of it for a long time. But 25 years later, Life magazine came out with a issue on the 25th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement and all that. And I bought the magazine, opened it up, and would you believe the first picture in there was that picture that I saw in that bar. And the stuff about "no more problems there" had to do with the fact that that lynching took place 8 miles from Fort Wayne. It wasn't a matter of no problems in a southern city. It was a matter of no problem.
Well, unfortunately, how about a world problem? I mean, you would hope
sure.
anywhere in the world that wouldn't happen, but it did.
Yeah.
Now here in our country.
And we like to think of somehow America creating democracy. It really didn't. Until the women in this country were allowed to vote, which is in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
That showed we weren't democratic because they didn't vote before then. And until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which right now is being vitiated by the Supreme Court and by the Republican Party and its trumpet-led leaders. We recognize that the Voting Rights Act was very helpful in getting a lot of black legislators and congressmen and so forth elected, but it's been something that again proved that we've never really been a fully democratic society. And even though the Voting Rights Act happened, it's been undercut by a Supreme Court which is terribly out of contact with the reality of freedom and justice for all. In fact, the first we know about Supreme Court head justice, it was before he was in the Justice Department. He was someone who was trying to fight voting rights for black people and other minorities.
Yeah.
So, there also were some unusual times in my civil rights days. I mentioned the thing about the Cow Palace and the Republican National Convention. There were some other times when I found myself in strange moral positions. The strangest one happened at St. Quentin Prison in California. This was, in the late 60s. There had not been an execution in California for a long time, but there was going to be one at San Quentin, and there was an all-night vigil to witness to the biblical injunction that thou shalt not murder. And it was a unusual night, melancholy in a lot of ways, considering what act we were there for, but it was also a kind of happy night. Joan Baez was there to lead the singing. A lot of politicians and actors and that were there, and it seemed a very positive event until dawn. And all of a sudden, marching into the parking lot where we were all assembled singing our kumbayas, there showed up George Lincoln Rockwell, the head of the American Nazi Party, in full Nazi regalia with 2 or 3 supporters and carrying a sign saying black crime or the death penalty, the only answer for black crime and red treason. Now, some people in the audience saw that, and their immediate reaction was to go to attack these unwanted visitors. And I happened to be nearby, and I happened to find myself laying body blocks to protect a Nazi, because I didn't think it was a good idea to have a nonviolent demonstration on the morning of an execution where a Nazi gets a beat out of him. Excuse the reference to excrement, but it was a morally ambiguous situation to find myself in, but yet one consistent with my values.
Yeah, well, pretty brave thing to do, and violence just begets violence, I think, right?
For sure.
In that. Well, listen, you can please text in questions or comments. We have a very interesting gentleman here with a very interesting life, and you can text in at 541-661-4098. And we're slinging right along. We're halfway through. So let me please point out that I'd like to remind everyone to listening to KCIW 100.7 FM here in Brookings, Oregon. We are an all-volunteer community radio station, and we are currently in need of volunteers and donations. And we're also looking for people to get their voice on air. We would like to hear your voice and your comments and your donations at kciw.org. So, Robert, I'm going to go back a little bit to as I scramble through my notes here. Well, number one, when you said you moved all around, was that all in California, Northern California?
we originally took the Super Chief from Chicago to Los Angeles.
Oh, the railroad.
Yeah, and for a while we lived in Los Angeles, but the next thing I knew, we were going north to the Bakersfield area, and I wound up in public schools both north and south of Bakersfield for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I don't know what was going on. My father was already in his 70s, and he may have been the world's fastest typesetter, but now he was a union member going to places where he would get union jobs and maybe getting into arguments with the foreman about his background and all that, and kept moving on. But I wound up in 2 different schools around Bakersfield. And then the next thing I knew, I was in a Lutheran school in San Francisco, and then a public school in Sunnyvale. And during those days, I walked through a apricot orchard to school, and now that land is worth extraordinarily high amounts of money.
That's the Southern Bay, South Bay area?
South Bay area. And then we moved to San Mateo, which is kind of the middle peninsula area. And I had relative stability being in the same school system for about 4 years then. But then, as I mentioned, my brother got accepted to Berkeley, and I wound up going to Berkeley.
Okay.
Or wound up... And all of this time, my mother had this idea of becoming a minister, and in my teenage years, I went to a kind of pre-seminary, which was people who wanted to be Lutheran ministers or parochial school teachers, and but I kept wondering if I really wanted to continue on that route, and therefore took a year off once to originally work in the railroad. I got my first job at the railroad, but
Your people.
But I later was offered a job at a church as a youth director and a parish assistant, and that was where I was to meet my eventual wife of 51 years. And
Well, that's a whole few shows right there. We know about that, but
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And
Anyway, I was very involved in both the youth work of my church and these priest-seminary type schools, and as a result of that, wound up seeing a fair amount of the United States as well as a fair amount of the world by the time I was 25.
Lots of travel in that time then.
They sent me to represent the national organization to regional conventions in places like Missoula, Montana, and Upper Minnesota, and Dallas, and then they sent me to a worldwide meeting in Helsinki, Finland, of what was called the Lutheran World Federation, and we traveled with Lutheran youths throughout much of Europe that summer, and I even got a trip to the Soviet Union in the process. And later, the same people who were involved in some of those travels were the ones that hooked me up with a radio job in Nigeria. So by the time I was 25 or so, I'd seen quite a bit of
You had a lot of experience going on.
You had more travel experience than most people have in their whole life.
Yeah, for sure.
And I have to give a little shout out to Finland. I don't know about, I have shirt-tail relatives from Finland, and we were talking, they were up visiting me 3 weeks ago, and found out that right now it's rated, I think, the happiest country in the world. So put that in or take it with a grain of salt, but and they're from Finland, and they would agree.
Yeah.
They really love it.
Well, anyway, after some of these travels were taking place and so forth, I find myself again wondering whether I really wanted to go the ministerial route or other routes, and wound up finishing my theological education with a internship in Sacramento, California.
My hometown, but go ahead.
While there, I got to know some people working in the legislature, and pretty soon I applied for a job there and got it as the chief legislative assistant of a woman whose name at that time was March Fong.
March Fong Yu.
She later became March Fong Yu.
Yeah, I remember
but
that.
she married someone named Yu while I was working for her, so
Okay.
I knew her in both contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And she decided to run for California Secretary of State, which she did.
Yeah.
And she offered me a top deputyship if I would move to Sacramento. And I didn't want to move to Sacramento, but I nonetheless worked for her for several years. And after she became Secretary of State, I started looking for other things to do. And I had a period in my life when I was either involved in politics as a press person, as a media person, as a speechwriter, as a humor writer, and also in other kind of jobs that were fascinating but often short-term, like there was a nuclear initiative in California to stop building of nuclear power plants
yeah.
in California. The initiative lost, but there has yet to be another power plant built in California since then.
Yeah.
And
the remnants of one of them is right near Sacramento, Rancho Seco.
yeah.
The towers are still there, I believe, last time I was
think
down
so.
there. Yeah.
And so I did lots of different things in media and politics and during those years, and I found myself again wondering if I wanted to go into the ministry and that. And I worked for campaigns that were local, but also presidential. And I still look back at the way I worked for Congressman Morris Udall.
Oh, my, that name rings a bell back in my memory.
Yeah. Well, back in the Kennedy days, his brother, Stuart Udall, was the Secretary of the Interior and probably the first real environmentalist person to hold that position. And his brother was a congressman, and this was right after Watergate. And after Watergate, Jimmy Carter appeared on the scene, and even though he looked like a funny combination of JFK and Howdy Doody, he came to become the president by saying things like, "I will never lie to you," and he was from a religious background and all of that, and that was fine and good, but he didn't really know how Washington worked. And
I would have to agree, but personally, he was one of my favorite presidents. I just thought the man was very decent.
yeah,
I don't know if he didn't know. He didn't want to participate in the deal making and backdoor stuff.
yeah, and for that he should be somewhat commended, but also these were the days when even people like Ronald Reagan could work out deals with Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House.
Certainly wouldn't happen now, but you're right.
So anyway, I had this period of time in my life that I was involved in a lot of interesting things, but I was not fully whole, one might call it, because I was not getting much exercise. There was then, as is somewhat still true now, there are many events in democratic politics, at least, where alcohol would play a key role. And I didn't get much exercise, and I was kind of meh, and found myself wondering where my next job was going to come from. And so after Morris Udall kept coming in second place to Jimmy Carter, I decided I was going to look into other things. I became a high school teacher, taking courses at night and learning how to teach during the day. And also my long ago seminary training that I had completed 20, 25 years earlier, the congregation in Berkeley, California, where I had been a member as a youth worker and so forth some 25 years earlier, was losing membership. They didn't have enough money to have someone full-time as a pastor. So they called me as a pastor. So for a 25-year period, I was both a high school teacher and a part-time Lutheran pastor. As a teacher, I taught both English and social studies. The social studies teaching included things like American history, world history, and civics. And some of the knowledge and skills I gained in that role later came in handy when in the city of Brookings, the Banana Belt members of the city council thought they were a banana republic that didn't have to obey the laws of the land and wasted $1 million in taxpayers' money in the process of being told they were wrong. And during those, the one block was about 25 years of all of those media and political and years. The next 25 years were focused on ministry and focused on being a good citizen in other ways than.
And all your teaching was all public schools, is that correct?
Yeah, and the last 13 years were at Oakland High School, which is by far the most ethnically mixed high school in Oakland. And I'm proud to say that one of my honor students there, a young man named Damian Lillard, was in one of my honors classes there, and he also served as a personal assistant to me. And he now has had a really distinguished career as a pro basketball player. He's the youngest member chosen to be one of the 75 best players in the first 75 years of the NBA, and someone who's I'm very proud of what's happened.
Yes, I believe we are familiar with.
We know you have an attachment to basketball.
Yeah.
Hence.
Yes.
Talk about the sobriquet, fancy name for nickname, Silky.
Silky. Well, after how I got back into basketball was in that transitional period where I had all those political jobs and that, I was hired to work at UC Berkeley as a writer and editor. And frankly, the job was kind of a misfit for me because I'd been dealing with big issues, world affairs, civil rights and all that. And now I was just working on reporting about public sector labor relations, which is one of the more dull subjects in the world. However,
But necessary.
People I worked with like basketball, and we started going to basketball in the university gymnasium after work virtually every day. I lost 65 pounds. Playing on a good hardwood court was really good for improving my game. I'd played some in high school and college in these small schools, but the main benefit I got from that was I both had a 7-foot-tall coach and another schoolmate who was taller than he, and in the process I learned when I put up my what was to become famous and Silky left-handed hook shot, that I shot it really high because I had these 7-footers guarding me, and but anyway.
You had your version of Jabbar's skyhook.
Yes. It looks like you may have just gotten a text.
Well, we did. Now, let me see. I forgot my reading glasses. I hope that I can go ahead and do this. Okay. Thank you, Texture. It says, the government is releasing a lot of UFO videos. Here we're going to jump, but that's okay. Like a basketball player, we're going to jump. What is your opinion? UFOs? Any opinion at all?
I have very little opinion about that other than we are in a vast universe where things are flying our way all the time.
Right.
And we have a scandal that our politicians are involved in that we need to move the interest away from.
And interestingly enough, we've done a show or two, I think, in the past, and right now that's actually coming into the news a little more. Might not be on the subjects we're talking about, but it is in the news.
Okay.
So
I want to make reference to something else that's been in my life, and that has to do with poetry. And I hope you can
that's right.
call up what's actually on YouTube of a poem that I wrote after the Kent State and Cambodia and Jackson State things went on a long time ago.
Okay.
Is that going to happen?
We're going to try. We have an excellent engineer in the booth, Mr. Michael, that will assist us. Can I pull that up now, Michael? He says yes. We're going to go ahead and try this poem. So here we go.
We'll be going here in just a minute.
Well,
I see
and you know
frantically pushing buttons
I am.
on his cell phone.
Here we go.
I recently had occasion to look at a sermon I delivered at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis in 1970, shortly after the news came out about Cambodia and the massacre of students at Kent State and Jackson State. And I was struck by a poem I wrote as part of a sermon for Vesper before the Eve of Ascension, which seems to speak very, very much to today as much as it did to the time of Kent State and Jackson State and Cambodia. Here it goes. He is gone. Primal vision, hangover from childhood, says he's gone. Sunday school archetype, informer of faith, existentially believed deep down inside, says he left, was launched, went off in a cloud, up, ascending, depending on the hemisphere. Adrift in space, perhaps marooned, obviously out of touch with mission control, with me, and definitely with some principalities and powers of this present age. Poorly equipped to control mission. Cambodia says he's gone. Cosmonauts didn't see him. The Mideast and Africa's not so funny fountains say he's gone. Realpolitik doesn't need him. Kent, Ohio says he's gone. White lives always provide more convincing evidence for whites. Whited sepulchres and whited crosses, whited countries and whited wars. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? In the face of the world's visual ads, reinforced by smells and pains and hunger pangs, one protests he reigns at the right hand of God, bringing perpetual malaise to those of us who are left-handed, or left-footed, or left-eyed, or left of silence. The right hand of God, sinister of him. God's zip code is not easily found, not even through ComSat. The kingdom of God, definitely not of this world. The kingdom of God heard that language in Rhodesia, South Africa, Germany. Delete God, Russia, China. The reign of God, the liberated zone, in ripping off pigs and killing commies for Christ. In anti-war wars, in anti-missile missiles, in pelvic thrusts and orgies of mysticism, in chemical ecstasy and feely-touchy voyeurism. Where is the Appropriations Committee for Style of Life in God, Mission in the Community? A publishing house of a denomination, you mighty Jung of my youth, I cannot turn off your projector, he is gone. White robes double as wings. Should we remember with balloons and bubbles, healing-filled effigies, talks of transcendence, litany upon litany, suffraging words without end, or perhaps kitschy illustrations of kites on sea but with pull, still entrancing frustrated flyers and battling kiting towers, erect beasts in all of us, in us as much as in Moloch, of the weathermanic depressive. We feel left, right, comfortless. One needn't go to the cinema to see The Dam. It would surely be a lot easier, wouldn't it, to be able to say,
low here, low there, about the presence of Christ. End of poem.
Well, wow. So along with your varied history, ministry, education, politics, you can add poet.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff.
Thank you. And
If you don't mind, what was your many inspiration? Did you have an overall inspiration or something that made you want to do that right then? Or had you been, and how long ago did you write that?
no, it's 60 years ago.
Oh, my.
And that leads to another thing related to poetry.
Okay.
In my recent years, I found myself writing and publishing on YouTube and Progressive Christianity, a website, a whole number of poems that had their origin in an effort between me and my wife, my late wife, and that was in her retirement. She took up calligraphy and soon added watercolors to her musical and legal careers. And in the process, we started sending out Christmas cards where she did some calligraphy and watercolor illustrations, and I wrote a poem. And the poems were often kind of updates on Christmas carols that emphasized the fact that Christianity has not only just to do with personal salvation, but has to do with peace and justice and those things that motivate us Christians who recognize that we live for the other and not for ourselves. And anyway, we since have had opera singers sing some of my poems. They're up on YouTube, and it's another part of my personality to know that I'm now I like to say a left coast American writer and poet, and hope that they inspire people to recognize how we should live today and with each other.
And how easy is that to pull up on YouTube?
Just go to Robert H. O'Sullivan.
Okay.
And many of them are there. Many of them are also at the site I mentioned earlier, progressivechristianity.org. And I should mention that some things are on my wife's YouTube site, which is Alice Wildermuth O'Sullivan. Wildermuth was her maiden name. And there's a vast amount of music there of her making.
Which was fantastic. We've talked about that on this show a couple of times.
Yes.
Fantastic. Beautiful stuff.
She was trained as a classical pianist. She had a regular organist job at the age of 5. And she also played for a jazz big band for over 20 years. They used to call her the Countess because she loved the music of Count Basie and Duke Ellington, although some say she should have been known as the Duchess. and she also directed choirs from the piano, including on famous and difficult classical works like Benjamin Britten's Ceremony of Carols, but also for a number of years, she had basically a black choir that she directed from the piano. It had some wonderful jazz musicians who accompanied her and the choir. And if you're looking for interesting things to listen to, I recommend that you go to Alice Wildermuth O'Sullivan's YouTube site or the Progressive Christianity site. Looks like you got a text or so.
While
I'm
trying his best to read that, could you just briefly explain what progressive Christianity means?
Yes, I wanted to go there too, yeah. And we're down to a little less than 5 minutes, but Here we go.
Well, I have trouble with the phrase because progressive has come to have a meaning relating to things like insurance and
well,
I think it's more thought of as being a liberal.
Yeah, but otherwise, progressive Christianity developed out of two sources. One is recognition by a lot of biblical scholars that the limited understanding of Christianity that a lot of fundamentalists and Pentecostalists have has a lot to do with personal salvation and very little to do with the fact that Jesus and his followers were proclaiming peace on earth and goodwill to all people. The faith is not just for white people, it's for all people, and that if we take it seriously, we're willing by our poems, by our actions, by our writing, to let the whole world know that progressive forces, inspired somewhat by biblical scholarship, but also inspired by black theology and what's been called liberation theology that developed out of South America. And all of these emphasize that the faith is about being decent and loving and caring and open and sensitive.
And focus on social justice.
To the needs.
Right?
And that's what the fight in Brookings was all about.
Yes.
Social justice, being fed, having some of the things that city leaders didn't like was there was someone who's both a Lutheran deacon, a member of the order of deaconesses in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, but also a lawyer. And she would help people do things like get old things expunged from their records.
Okay.
And if you don't, you have trouble just getting housing and things like that. But if you were evicted and still owed some money on paying for the eviction, she could arrange it for or find ways to help get that settled so that one again can get into the housing thing. So when I say progressive Christianity, it is one that is very consistent with Jesus in that it has to do this world, here and now, not just an afterlife.
Sounds like Jesus was a liberal. Progressive at the...
That's one way of defining who he was. He definitely changed the way in which much of the world perceived how we should live. And that was not to live for oneself, for one's selfishness, but to live with the ideas of the needs of people who were struggling and people who needed a little boost to get back on their feet and to live a more pleasant and positive life.
And before we do run out of time, I find, thank you, Texter. I'm the operator standing by, and it took me a while to pull it up, but I got it. And I'll read it as it says. Here it says, to Robert, how did you get into Blake is what it says. Do we know what Blake is? I'm not quite sure.
Okay, William Blake, and we don't have a whole lot of time.
No, we are running out real quick.
But was a artist and poet at the time of the American and French revolutions.
Okay.
And one who was very informed by his own Christianity, but one who was not going along with the agenda of the white folk who ruled England and so forth. And he's inspired many people since then.
Okay.
And you can read about my opinions, especially on progressive Christianity there.
Okay. Well, Robert, thank you as always. Interesting, wonderful guest. I'd like to thank all the listeners out there, and thank you for the texters. You've been listening to KCIWLP 100.7 FM in Brookings, Oregon.